my name is Greg Woodring. I am the president of Ann Arbor for Public Power. So what is Ann Arbor for Public Power? We are a grassroots local organization with representation from various different local organizations, and we believe in a green and publicly owned future. Our goal is to democratize, decommodify, decarbonize, and decolonize our energy sources. We started about nearly 3 years ago now in early 2020, organizing around this effort. And primarily, we began to organize around this due to climate concerns. Simply put, DTE is not transitioning to renewables fast enough to meet global or local emissions targets. However, as we'll get into later in the presentation, and as probably many of you have top of your mind at the moment, reliability and affordability turns out are very large issues with DTE, and we believe that public power is a solution for that. So just a bit about the climate side of DTE, however. This is DTE's energy mix as of 2021. It has slightly changed, however, it is mostly the same. As you can see, they are primarily generating their power through coal, with about 10 to 20% of it coming from fracked gas, about 20% of it coming from nuclear, and then only about 10% of it coming from renewables. And of that renewable power, some of it includes things like burned garbage, which is not exactly what we would think of as a carbon neutral form of energy generation. And that is rather out of alignment with what we in Ann Arbor have set as a goal for 2030, and then what President Joe Biden has set for a carbon-free nationwide clean energy goal of 2035. DTE has a net zero emissions target date of 2050. However, they don't really even have a real plan to reach that. They actually have moved up. This is slightly out of date. They have moved up their coal retirement date to 2036. However, they plan to keep burning fracked gas forever. And their climate plans are primarily based on what we would consider technological wishful thinking. They have this 2050 carbon neutrality date, but they do not plan to ever stop burning fracked gas. And they believe that somehow through the use of technology, they will be able to reduce those emissions to zero, which is ridiculous. Even if you could burn this fracked gas without emitting any carbon, the amount of carbon that is released from the extraction and transportation of fracked gas is simply not able to be written off. And when you do consider that amount of emissions, it actually turns out to be rather comparable to the emissions from coal. And so our solution, as you might have guessed, is a process called municipalization, right? So what is municipalization? It is essentially the process of taking something that is privately owned, so our energy grid, and taking it under control of the city, right? And as you might have heard, there's also some plans to maybe even do this at the county-wide scale, which I believe Yousef Rabhi will be able to get into later. Now, municipal utilities are nothing new. In fact, most people likely get their water and sewers from a publicly owned utility. In Ann Arbor, we have a public water and sewer utility. However, public power utilities are also rather common across the U.S. There's actually over 2,000 across the U.S., with over 40 of them in Michigan alone. And the reason for that is not surprising. Municipalization is explicitly protected by the state constitution. In fact, it is made legal by the city charter of Ann Arbor as well, who did have a municipal utility until the early 20th century when it was sold off. So why is it that we believe that public power is the right option for us? Well, as probably many of us are concerned about right now, reliability is obviously a huge benefit of public power utilities, and we'll go into why in a moment. Additionally, however, public power utilities tend to be cheaper. They give us local control, they invest in our community, and they are the environmentally responsible choice. So reliability. Now, nationwide, public power utilities tend to lose power about half as often as their private power utility counterparts. However, in Michigan, that is not quite the whole story. Now, these numbers are from 2017. However, if anything, these numbers have gotten more dramatic with the recent outages. 2017, DTE had a little over 1,000 minutes of downtime. The city of Lansing, the state's largest publicly owned power utility, by comparison, had just a bit over 250, which is a 4 times less outage than we experienced under DTE. That means that their power went out less often and it came back up quicker. And the reason for this is not exactly surprising. Private power utilities are looking for a profit. Every dollar that they spend on infrastructure is a dollar that is not going to shareholder profits. Meanwhile, public power utility does not have this same profit incentive. They are typically governed by a board that is either appointed or elected, and that board's incentive is to provide the best service possible so that they continue to be put back into that role. And that's never been more dramatic than recently. With the most recent ice storm, Lansing, at its worst, reported 100 outages, and currently 100% of their power was restored. That happened within 24 hours. Chelsea, 24-hour restoration time. Wyandotte, 24-hour restoration time, all publicly owned power utilities. Meanwhile, Ann Arbor experienced 37,000 outages, Washtenaw County experienced about 60,000 outages, and DTE's service territory as a whole experienced over 600,000 outages. And there are still portions of the city that are without power. Despite the fact that they had a very similar ice storm, as you can see here, Lansing did get slightly less ice at 0.44 inches compared to 0.65 inches that Ann Arbor experienced. However, that does not really account for the dramatic difference in the level of outages, nor the difference between Chelsea and Wyandotte. However, it might surprise you that public power utilities actually are able to achieve this while still charging their customers less. Now, these numbers, again, are a little bit older. Ann Arbor is currently paying about 18-ish cents per kilowatt hour. However, they're relatively similar in terms of their proportions. Chelsea, as you can see, our next door neighbor, is paying 10.15 cents per kilowatt hour, which is a 40% decrease in their energy bills month after month. And the reason for this, once again, is not surprising. Public power utilities are not paying out a profit to shareholders. Additionally, they are not paying huge executive salaries and bonuses. They're not spending money on advertising, and public power utilities are able to borrow money cheaper. They're able to finance infrastructure investment and upgrades at a much cheaper rate than a private power utility can, because they are borrowing as a city, which allows them to borrow at a much lower rate than a private power utility can. And additionally, they finance, this is a little bit wonky here, but they finance entirely with debt as opposed to debt and equity. And the equity cost of finance is quite heavy for, quite expensive for private power utilities like DTE. So there are a lot of huge benefits that public power utilities have that allow them to be more affordable than their private power utility counterparts. Additionally, though, we don't just believe that this is a good idea because it is cheaper, better power, though. That's probably enough of a reason to make the switch on its own. However, we also believe that it's important for us to have local control over our own utility. When we control the power, we control the rates, we control the source of power, and we control when infrastructure is updated. Additionally, it invests in our community. Now, I can get really wonky with you, but I'm going to try to spare you with that and not go too deep into the difference between pilot and taxes. However, it is true that communities tend to get back more money sent directly to their community from public power utilities than they do from private power utilities paying taxes. However, investing our community with a public power utility also means good union jobs, modern, reliable infrastructure, and a resilient energy grid. And I want to pause just a little bit on the unionization portion here. A huge issue currently in the clean energy space is that many of the clean energy contractors are non-union, and that's not surprising. They're primarily residential contractors working for very small jobs with very thin margins. Public power would allow the city of Ann Arbor, or potentially the county of Washtenaw, or even beyond that, to do larger purchases of renewable energy generation. This would mean that it would also go through responsible contracting policies, which we've set in both Ann Arbor and the Washtenaw County level, which would make unionized shops much more competitive when bidding for these larger contracts to build out renewable energy. And this will help with that overall goal of a just transition and moving us towards the future that we need in order to have a sustainable energy future, while bringing labor along with us. And finally, and as I said, this was kind of a lot of the driving reasons why we in Ann Arbor for Public Power got this started. It is the environmentally responsible choice. Simply put, it allows us to get to 100% renewable energy on our own terms. DTE, as I showed earlier, has said that they simply have no intention to ever do this. However, and this is relevant to the most recent ice storm, it also allows us to get rid of some of the most restrictive things that DTE does in terms of allowing us to generate our own power. Currently, there is a 1% cap on the amount of local distributed energy generation that we're allowed to do. That means rooftop solar. Once we reach that cap, and we are pretty much there already, DTE is allowed to prevent anybody from installing more rooftop solar on their home. However, these caps are at the discretion of the utility. And if we had our own utility, we would be able to remove these caps. In addition, DTE has lobbied the state to remove net metering. What net metering is it says that essentially when you have solar panels on your roof, and this is where you don't have batteries, which makes it a little bit weirder. But if you have solar panels on your roof, you generate power and you put that back on the grid. And then when you're using power, you pull it off of the grid. Now, in the past, when you put power back on the grid, you got paid back the rate that you are buying electricity at, right? So it was 1-to-1, and you were essentially, it was like you were using your own power. However, DTE managed to make it so that instead they can pay you wholesale rates for energy. And then you had to buy the power back at retail rates, which means you're only really getting about half of the value of the electricity that you're generating. This is something that we could eliminate with a public power utility. And finally, the last thing I'll say on the environmental side of public power is that if you look across the country, there are 6 utilities with 100% renewable power fuel mix. Every single one of them are publicly owned, either municipally owned or co-ops. But as many people worry, how are you going to pay for it, right? The cost of this must be enormous. How can we do it? Well, you might be surprised to find that, well, the upfront cost certainly isn't small. It actually is probably the cheapest way that we possibly could do this, because in the end, it's going to make us money. The typical way that you create a public power utility is that you will first assess the value of the infrastructure, which currently Ann Arbor is already doing. And then you take out debt to buy out that infrastructure, right? You take out revenue bonds for the cost of that infrastructure. And then you're able to pay off those revenue bonds with the money that you were generating from the utility itself, right? So the electrical rates that we are already paying would then go towards paying off this process of municipalization. And if you look at communities across the country, they by and large are able to pay off this debt while maintaining similar or lower rates to their incumbent utility. And they are able to increase reliability and focus on other goals that the utility might have. And I have some examples that I'm going to show you later in this presentation that show places where that has happened. Just to underscore this, what this means is that we can municipalize, we can create public power without raising taxes. We do not actually need to take any additional funding from the city budget. And in fact, it actually will likely put money back into the city budget. As I was mentioning earlier, public power utilities tend to contribute a lot of money back to their incumbent cities' general funds. Now, I spent a very exciting night looking through a whole bunch of financial statements from various publicly owned power utilities across the state of Michigan. Traverse City, $1.6 million sent back to the city in 2020. Holland, $7.6 million sent back to the city in 2020. And Lansing, the state's largest public power utility, sent a whopping $23.1 million back to their community. Now, that is money that is after all expenses, right? That is completely free money that the city is allowed to do whatever they want to do with, right? That can go back into services or into infrastructure, into roads, that can go towards whatever the city deems is a priority for it. And when you look at other communities that have municipalized, they are able to send this fee back to the city. Now, I want to just go through a little bit of a story of how it is that we got to this situation. How is it that we got to a spot where across the state of Michigan, we have basically two utilities, Consumers Energy and DTE, and nothing else, and no seeming way to get out of it? Well, back in the late 19th century, energy was a newfangled thing. A lot of communities wanted it, not a lot of communities had it. And these communities were looking for ways that they could build it up. Those communities that had the means to do so tended to build their own. They would build their own generation, they would run their own lines, and they would create the public power utilities, many of which are the current public power utilities you see today. However, communities that couldn't afford this entered into what's called a franchise agreement with private investors. Now, a franchise agreement is essentially an agreement saying, okay, for a set amount of time, 5, 10, 20, 30 years, we are going to only buy power from you. And that is a way for you to recoup the investment that you made in order to build up the generation, to run the lines, so on and so forth. However, in 1905, the state of Michigan, the state legislature, was looking at the legal landscape of Michigan and looking at all of these different franchise agreements that these communities had formed. Tons of different communities had contracts with all of these different small power utilities. And they said, well, this is a bit of a mess. Everyone has kind of written these agreements differently. Let's standardize it. However, when they were doing this, it just so happened that a man named Foote was within the legislature. Now, Foote also was on the board of a company called Consumers Energy. And when they wrote this bill, they eliminated all of the expiration dates on these franchise agreements, making them permanent. So now you have Ann Arbor, who signed a contract with a tiny little electric company in 1896 for 26 electric light bulbs that had a perpetual franchise agreement. Now, this understandably ticked a lot of people off. And in 1907, they passed a constitutional amendment saying you cannot have a franchise agreement that lasts for more than 30 years. However, the utilities sued, took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court found that you cannot go back and modify an existing contract. It applied to all future franchise agreements, but all the franchise agreements that currently exist, which in the state of Michigan at this point was most of Michigan, all of those were locked into these Foote Act franchise agreements, which astute listeners might find a little ironic considering the legislature had just overwrote these contracts. I don't have a good explanation for you for how that has happened. However, unfortunately, throughout the 20th century, this was upheld time and time again. And in fact, it was made worse, where the Supreme Court found that when you bought out an existing power company, you inherited those franchise agreements, which meant that all of these different companies that had all of these different franchise agreements slowly got ate up. And now just two companies, Consumers Energy and DTE, control the vast majority of all of these contracts. And that means that DTE is the only one that gets to choose if we use a different power utility. Except, of course, we wouldn't be here if there wasn't a loophole. And there is. The one exception to this is that a municipality always has the right to its own franchise agreement. So if we want to get rid of this dirty utility that overcharges us for worse service, we need to look into public power. It is the only way that we have to break free from this monopoly utility situation that we have found ourselves in. So how do we do it? How do we create public power? Well, the good news is within Ann Arbor, and actually within Washtenaw County, we've already sort of taken the first step. Now, the first step not pictured here really was to do a legal analysis. And Ann Arbor for Public Power did a legal analysis. We hired some lawyers up in Traverse City called Olson, Bisdock, and Howard to do an analysis, and they found that it is absolutely legal for the city of Ann Arbor to municipalize. Last night, and the county commission Commissioner Rabhi put forward a resolution directing the county's legal counsel to look into whether this is legal for the county to do as a whole. And I'm going to let Yousef Rabhi speak to that here in a little bit. However, the next step after that is to do a feasibility study. And within Ann Arbor, that's already underway. And the feasibility study essentially looks at, can we do the process that I just laid out? Can we buy out the infrastructure and run it and charge rates that are comparable to DTE, right? So are we able to run a utility and pay off our debt at a comparable rate to DTE? That is currently being done, and we will have the results of that in June. The next step then is to create the utility and begin the acquisition process of the assets. And we have two ways that we can do this. Either we can put pressure on the city council to start this process, and they could do it by city ordinance, or if the city council is unwilling to do this, we could take it to the vote of the people. And Ann Arbor Public Power has language, and we are ready to do this. However, of course, we'd prefer to work through the city council and move it forward that way. Now, once this has been done, DTE is required to agree to sell us the assets. However, they can argue about the price of those assets, and Ann Arbor will come up with some cost, and DTE is going to come up with some higher cost. What most likely will happen is that this disagreement will go to court, and a court is going to decide on the true value of these assets. Once that value has been established, we must then go to one final vote of the people. And the state constitution requires that that vote pass with a 60% majority. If we get a 60% majority on that vote, then we finally do have our own public power utility, and we can start to make upgrades to the reliability. We can start to end the price gouging of DTE, and we can start to aggressively move towards 100% renewable power. Now, I also want to mention the SEU. SEU, otherwise known as a Sustainable Energy Utility, is a plan currently within the city of Ann Arbor. This largely came out of some of the early conversations between Ann Arbor for Public Power and the Office of Sustainability and Innovation within Ann Arbor. And essentially, it's a little bit of a compromise between full municipalization and the current state, where the city could set up a utility without fully buying out the assets, right? So we wouldn't buy the poles and wires. However, we would create our own utility, and it would allow people to get around some of these caps on rooftop solar, to expand the rooftop solar, and even maybe microgrid that with our neighbors so that we could build up these smaller microgrids. All of this is good stuff, and within Ann Arbor for Public Power, we fully support it. However, it is not a replacement of municipalization. If we do not buy out the infrastructure, we are still going to be reliant on DTE's poor infrastructure and their power. Fact of the matter is that there is simply not enough power generation potential within Ann Arbor to fully meet our energy needs. Additionally, this would be a subscription program, right? And so you're never going to fully reach all of Ann Arbor through this program. However, so essentially there are two ways that the city can generate power. The SEU would have access to one of them, which is to generate our own, right? We can put solar panels on people's roofs. You know, there is a hydroelectric dam within the city. We could potentially start to use some of that power. However, the other one is a power purchase agreement, and that is where we buy power from outside the city. With a municipal utility, we would buy a connection to what's called the MISO grid, the Mid-Continent Interchange System Operator. And essentially that is what is known as a regional distribution grid, and all of these different regional distribution grids connect into what's known as the national grid. And you've probably heard of the national grid because Texas isn't on it. This is not owned by anyone. It's a not-profit company. It's kind of like a public-private sort of deal. And this is where all of the power across the country is bought and sold on. And Ann Arbor would have access to this. And we would be able to buy power, and we would be able to specifically target renewable power from outside of the city. So we would not be an island. We would not be cut off. We would be able to buy and sell power from outside of Ann Arbor. However, without buying out that infrastructure, we're not going to be able to do this. So the SEU will allow us to expand our renewable generation, to increase our reliability. However, it is not a replacement for fully municipalizing. We see them as complementary plans. We believe that you can move faster with an SEU. You could do this during the process of acquiring those assets. However, if we really want to reach our goals and we really want to increase our reliability, we're going to need to fully municipalize. And finally, before I let Yousef Rabhi speak, and then we get into the public comment that I'm very excited to do, I just want to leave you with a few successful examples across the country where this has been done before. Long Island, New York, in 1998, municipalized their energy source. They now serve well over 1 million customers and were able to reduce their electrical rates by an average of 20%. Winter Park, Florida, municipalized in 2005. The city was able to use the city made so much money off of its utility that it was able to begin to aggressively start to underground their lines. Winter Park actually gave a very fantastic presentation to the city's Energy Commission back in October of 2021. And if anybody is more interested in learning about this, I highly recommend that you go back and look at that. It is archived on YouTube. They largely municipalized because they were being hit by hurricanes. They were having horrible reliability, much like we are experiencing here with the recent ice storm or the storm in August, the storm in August before that. And their utility simply wasn't prioritizing them. For one, they were not on the coast, and the utility was prioritizing getting the coastal cities up and running. And the utility was refusing to actually underground their wires. Winter Park now is on track to undergrounding 100% of their wires, and they have dramatically improved their reliability. Another fantastic example, one that I find particularly inspiring, is Jefferson County, Washington. 2008, they voted to establish a municipal utility. Following 2 years of negotiations, they bought out their local private utility for $103 million. They now generate a 97% carbon-free electricity mix, one of the cleanest electricity mixes in the country, hopefully soon to be beaten by Ann Arbor at 100%. And finally, before I turn it over to Commissioner Rabhi, we have Boulder, Colorado. Now, Boulder, Colorado, some people might find surprising that we are calling this a success story. It's oftentimes used as a bit of a boogeyman within municipalization efforts. And it makes sense why. Boulder fought a very long, hard battle to municipalize. It took about 10 years. And that was because they made a few legal mistakes early on in the process, which allowed their utility to begin to bring litigation against them earlier. That shouldn't have been possible, right? Obviously, municipalization fights do have to fight the legal battle over the valuation, but that tends to be the only one. And in Boulder, there was some mistakes made that they will fully admit to that made that more difficult. However, we actually did have Boulder representatives from Boulder come to speak at the Ann Arbor Energy Commission as well in October of 2021. And they told us that they felt like it was a huge success. And the reason is that they ended up settling with their private power utility, Xcel Energy. And in that settlement, they got an agreement to an 80% statewide greenhouse gas reduction. They have emissions target check-ins at 2022, 2024, and 2027. Additionally, they entered into an agreement to massively increase the reliability of their infrastructure. It meant that they could expand microgridding, expand distributed energy generation, and generally increase the reliability. This was stuff that took place statewide. And it's important to remember this story because even in failing, Boulder feels like they succeeded. And the reason is because municipalization is some of the biggest amount of leverage that we possibly can get on a private power utility. It is simply the biggest threat that a community can possibly bring up against a private power utility, and allows us to extract huge concessions from them. And Ann Arbor for Public Power, make no mistake, we are absolutely committed to fully municipalizing and fully going all the way. But even if you're skeptical about our chances, there is a huge amount of reason to support a public power campaign because of the concessions that it allows you to demand from the incumbent utilities. Now, I've spoken a lot. Thank you all for tuning in, and I want to hand it over to Commissioner Yousef Rabhi here.
Wonderful. Well, great presentation, Greg. Thank you. I'm on with you today, and I'm glad that you're having this forum. I'm glad that so many people have joined, and appreciative to the opportunity to speak here today. We have a crisis on our hands, and we've had a crisis on our hands for some years, not just here in Southeast Michigan, but across our state. Our investor-owned utilities are completely negligent. They have decided to put profits over people. And the storm that just happened proved that, but it was not the first time. We have had outages, countless outages throughout our region that have left people in the dark. These investor-owned utilities decide that they can pocket $1.1 billion for DTE, $827 million for consumers in a single year. That is money that comes out of our pockets. Money that should be invested in our grid, money that should be used to bury power lines, money that should be used to harden the grid so that when storms hit, which they will hit, because we all know what is happening with climate change. We know that storms are going to be hitting harder. And we, by the way, live in Michigan, a state where we get freezing rain, where we get snowstorms. And you know what? Our grid should be up to the task. Look what happened all over the Midwest. Every other state that got hit by this storm was back online within 24 hours. Some 2 days, but none more than that. Areas that had municipal energy, back online in 24 hours. What is happening is not normal. What is happening is not acceptable. When we pay our utility bills, our expectation is that our lights will stay on. We are not paying our utility bills so that some fat cats in Wall Street can have lobster dinners and caviar. We are not paying our bills so that the CEOs of DTE and consumers can walk away with a combined $15 million in salaries. We are not paying our utility bills so that they can put billboards up and run ads on TV and run ads at basketball games and sponsor Zambonis at U of M basketball games. That's not why we're paying our utility bills. We are not paying our utility bills to have these utilities hire every single large lobby firm in Lansing to do their bidding, but they are. We do not pay our bills so that they can take our money and use it to influence elections, which is exactly what they're doing to the tune of tens of millions of dollars every year. They give money to candidate affiliated C4 organizations. They give money to elected official affiliated C4 organizations. They have their own C4 organizations. The C4 organization is an advocacy organization. They're the ones that run the billboards that you see that say this or that candidate is voted to raise your rates. Call his office, call her office, tell them that they're terrible. And it's a picture of them in black and white with red lettering, scare tactic. It's not technically saying to vote for or against that candidate, but it certainly is influencing that election. DTE and consumers both have C4 entities that use your hard-earned ratepayer money that you pay to influence elections to get people in the legislature and in other offices in state government that will do their bidding. That is not why we pay our bills. We pay our bills for the lights to stay on, for the fridges to stay on, for us to be able to live a decent life. When the power goes out, it's not just an inconvenience. It's people losing food. Grocery bills are through the roof. You can't buy a bag of groceries without spending almost $100. And you expect that when you put that food in your fridge or in your freezer, it's going to last. What about people that have medicine that goes bad when the fridge goes out? What about people who have medical needs, and when the power goes out, they can't fulfill those needs? What about seniors? What about animals? Everyone suffered and still is suffering. People are still without power. This is an unacceptable situation. The economic impact of the storm, the economic impact of outages is another thing that we need to talk about. $3.5 billion in 2021 alone. $3.5 billion was the economic impact to Michigan's economy. That is lost economic potential to our economy due to outages. Why would you want to locate your factory in Michigan? Why would you want to bring your business here if you can't rely on the grid? This is an economic development issue. We are losing out on business potential, on factory growth. We're doing all this with economic development right now. It's not worth anything. A company doesn't want to come here if you dangle a check in front of them. A company wants to come here because the lights stay on. And we can't provide that right now. What about the small businesses? What about the small grocery stores, the small coffee shops? I'm sure we have some business owners here on the call. What did you do for 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, a week without being able to open your doors? But you're still paying taxes. You're still paying rent. DTE is not compensating you for that. That $35 that they announced is complete BS. It is an insult. $35 doesn't even begin to cover the pain and suffering, doesn't begin to cover the groceries. And by the way, that $35 is coming out of your pocket. It's coming out of my pocket. They can rate base that $35 all day long. I introduced a bill when I was in the legislature to create automatic outage credits so that everybody in the state of Michigan that experiences an outage would get an hourly automatic credit that would increase every hour that your power is out. And it would say that DTE and consumers have to pay for it out of their profit, not out of the pockets of other ratepayers. At the county commission last night, we had a discussion as a board on what we need to do here in Washtenaw County to take our power back. We are fed up. And by the way, I've been involved in A2P2 since its inception. I was actually part of starting A2P2, and I'm proud to be on the advisory board of this organization. We absolutely need an Ann Arbor municipal utility. In my estimation, after 6 years of serving in Lansing, after introducing bill after bill after bill to hold the utilities accountable and seeing the utilities flex their might through their lobbyists, through the donations that they give. And again, it's all about those corporate donations that they give to the C4s. They also give about $1 million a year from their PACs to candidates. They control the process in Lansing. They control everything. We cannot get good common sense legislation passed. The only way that we are going to make a difference is by removing ourselves completely from DTE's grid and taking charge of our energy future. But what we talked about last night was that it's not just about Ann Arbor. It's about our whole county. Frankly, it's about our whole state. And yes, I did introduce a bill to take over all the utilities in the state of Michigan, all the investor-owned utilities, and make them all run by the state of Michigan. Now, I know that that bill is never going to pass, but in the meantime, we're working on making sure that Ann Arbor can have a municipal utility. And last night at our board meeting, I announced my plan to hold the utilities accountable and to explore the creation of a Washtenaw County-wide utility. I believe, in my interpretation of state law and the research that I've done, that it is absolutely possible. It is absolutely possible for the county to do that. Now, what we did is we instructed our attorneys to look into it, and we are further exploring that option. If it is possible, I believe it's something that our county board has, it's very clear from the words that were said around the table last night, there is a passion for us to take control of our power here in Washtenaw County, and I believe that we can do it, and I believe that we have the political will to do it. But I don't want to stop there. I don't want to stop there because in the meantime, there's a whole heck of a lot that we can do. That's going to take time for A2P2, for Washtenaw County Power, whatever it looks like, to get off the ground. But in the meantime, we need to hold DTE and consumers' feet to the fire for what they just did and what they continue to do day in and day out with outages that occur almost weekly throughout our region. I announced a 5-part plan. The first part of that plan is that, again, another part of state law, in fact, it's in our state constitution, read Article 7, Section 15. It grants county commissions the ability, the power in our state constitution to intervene in a Michigan Public Service Commission rate case. You may already know that DTE, only several days before the outage occurred, announced a 14% increase on residential rates. They have one of the least reliable systems in the entire country, with outages that happen so often, with outages that happen for long periods of time, with rates that are some of the highest already, and yet they want another 14%. Unacceptable. So I would like the county to intervene in that rate case on behalf of all the citizens in Washtenaw County to say, hell no, that's not acceptable. In addition, I would like the county to initiate a rate case against DTE to lower the rates, And for everybody that got their power put out for several days, for even just a few hours, we need to be compensated for that. $35 is an insult. I would like for us to move towards an hourly outage credit that increases by the hour. And I want to initiate a rate case on behalf of Washtenaw County that asks the Michigan Public Service Commission to do just that. So we tasked our attorneys last night to explore that. Part two is what I just talked about with Washtenaw County municipalization. We need to remove ourselves from DTE altogether. Part three is, I believe that we as a county can advocate for the passage of state laws that will help to hold DTE accountable. I already told you all about the rate, the outage credit, that bill that I introduced. Well, there's another bill that I introduced that I am really passionate about seeing passed. And that is a bill to make it illegal for any regulated utility to donate any kind of corporate money to these C4 entities. We don't want them to control the political process. They shouldn't be able to. We should be removing that ability from them. They are a regulated utility. We should not allow them to influence the people that are supposed to be regulating them. We cannot allow the fox to continue guarding the hen house. We need a law to pass to prevent that from happening. I introduced bills when I was in office to roll back that 1% cap, so we didn't have a 1% cap on net metering, so people could put solar on their homes. I introduced a bill to put us back to the net metering system that we had. I had a bill to remove the distributed generation grid tariff. DTE and consumers stopped all those bills from happening. Like I said, I had a bill to move all of our investor-owned utilities to being state-run. And obviously, we as a county can be advocates, and I would like our county board of commissioners to pass resolutions in support of those bills and direct our lobbyists, which we do have, to go up to Lansing and advocate for us. So that's part three. Part four, I want the CEOs of DTE and consumers before the board of commissioners. And I believe that state law permits the county board of commissioners to subpoena the CEOs of both of those corporations to appear before the board and submit them to questioning. I want to know why they decided $1.1 billion for DTE and $827 million for consumers was an acceptable thing to take out of the grid. That is all money that is not going to be invested in the grid. The beauty of a municipal utility, that money doesn't go to Wall Street. It goes to Main Street. It goes to Main Street to fix the grid. That's why we need a municipal utility. But I want to bring those utility executives before the board of commissioners and submit them to a line of questioning. I believe that state law allows us to subpoena them, and I hope that our attorneys will come back and confirm that. So we have tasked our attorneys with looking at that. The last part I want to talk about, part 5 of my plan, is looking at this hotel price gouging situation. Absolutely unacceptable. Our hoteliers should be ashamed. Any hotelier that raised rates during this crisis should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. People got double booked for rooms. They would show up to the hotels with their families and just get turned away. Unacceptable. That can't be allowed to stand. Our county has an accommodations ordinance, and I intend to fully utilize what power we have to hold those hoteliers accountable. I've talked to the prosecuting attorney in Washtenaw County. If anybody on this call experienced price gouging or saw price gouging happening or experienced overbooking and got turned away from a hotel, I need you to contact the Washtenaw County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. There is an economic crimes division, and they have agreed to investigate this matter. If you have information, if you experienced any of these things, contact the Economic Crimes Division of the Washtenaw County Prosecutor's Office. They are on the case, and part of our resolution last night was to engage them in that process. So we've got a 5-part plan. We're going after the utilities. This is absolutely unacceptable. And Greg, we need Ann Arbor to have a municipal utility. We need Washtenaw County to have a municipal utility. And there's one last thing, which is I have gotten contact from several local elected officials across our region. This is a hot issue right now. And they are contacting me and saying, how do we create a regional municipal utility even in other parts, Western Wayne County, people reaching out to me, they want to expand what we are doing here in Ann Arbor. We are building a movement, not just for Ann Arbor, but for the whole state. If we can do it here, we can take on DTE and consumers and their excess and their profits and their corporate CEOs, and we can take power back for the people. Thanks, Greg.
Fantastic, extremely eloquent as always. Thank you so much, Commissioner Rabhi. Amazing. Okay, so now we're getting into what I think is the most exciting part of our evening, which is hearing from all of you. This is an open public comment for you to share your stories, your outages, your trials and tribulations throughout this DTE outage. Yousef and I will also be here. If you have questions about the process of public power, about what we can do, feel free to ask them and we will do our best to respond to them. We're going to try to get through as many people as we possibly can. We've got about 80 people on here. Please be mindful of your speaking time. If anybody goes over 3 minutes, I will probably caution you to try to wrap it up. So thank you. For anyone who is unfamiliar with Zoom, there is a raise hand feature. That is how I'm going to be calling on you, and I will be calling on people in order. All right, starting it off now with, oh, and one final disclaimer before we get into it. I said this in the beginning, but for anyone who wasn't here, this is being recorded. It will be uploaded to our YouTube and social media. Additionally, we do know that there may be some press in the audience tonight, and they are recording it as well. So please be aware that anything you say is public and it may be reshared. Thank you. Can you unmute and speak?
Sorry, I didn't intend to speak. It was a false hand, sorry.
No worries. Ashley, you are up.
Hi, my name is Ashley Strange. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I am a construction project manager for Sumter Solar Services in Belleville. And I just wanted to share a story I had with some of my clients during the ice storm. One of the things I really don't like is the utility is just through their practices and whatnot is kind of forced solar customers to isolate their systems. And one of my clients was he's an older man, and I was over there talking to him and hearing his experience. Like, he has solar at his house and he has electric heat, but he was not allowed to turn his solar on to heat his house, and he was freezing. Like, if he didn't die, like, someone is going to die, and like it is unnecessary. I don't know if we can force the utility to allow people with solar to operate, or if forcing manufacturers to require. I know there's some additional technical things, and that's why DTE does it the way they do, but it's someone is going to die, and I really can't stand for it, and I just want to help however I can.
Thank you so much, Ashley. That's a horrifying story, and certainly something that I hope that a public power utility will be able to help with, whether that's in investing in our infrastructure so that power doesn't go out like that, or programs like many municipal utilities have across the country where they will help you afford battery backups and things like that so that your solar system can stay on throughout outages.
Greg, can I respond to that question too?
Yes.
So great question, Ashley. And when I was in office as state representative, all 3 terms that I was in office, I drafted and helped introduce a bill on that exact issue. The way that we approached it was, we said, because this is an issue statewide for the investor-owned utility service areas, that people can't switch off of the grid. We introduced a bill that basically said that you could that for critical infrastructure like police stations, fire stations, hospitals, that you could switch your basically your solar panels off of the grid and run on island mode. So it was sort of the island mode bill. The utilities, frankly, fought that really hard. They didn't want it to get it passed, and so for 3 years it didn't get passed. And it wasn't because the Republicans were in charge. I actually gave the bill to Republicans to introduce. and it was introduced by a Republican for three terms, and it still didn't pass. So again, that it just goes to show you the power of these utilities that they have in Lansing. And Greg's absolutely right. A public municipal utility would allow us to allow people. We can write our own rules. We don't have to follow the investor-owned utilities playbook. We can say yes, people can have that grid shut off so that if the power goes out in the city for some reason, that they can then run on their own solar panels. And just to underscore something Greg said too, look at the comparison right between how Lansing Board of Water and Light treats their solar customers versus how DTE treats its solar customers. This is part of why I got so passionate about municipalization, is because in Lansing, they were giving out a 2,000, this was, I don't know if they're still doing this, but they were doing it at the time. Not only did they allow for people to put solar on their homes, which DTE doesn't with that 1% cap, but they also were giving out a $2,000 credit to anybody that wanted to put solar on their home. They were actively encouraging homeowners to do that and giving out money to help encourage people to invest in that way. That is a stark difference with the way that DTE and consumers are acting with that 1% cap. It's 1% of all the energy generated in the entire system. You know this already as a solar installer, but that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that they've put these limitations in place. But again, that just goes back to their power in Lansing and why we need a municipal utility.
Absolutely. Thank you, Yousef. All right. Next up, we have John Miller. John, you can unmute.
Thank you, Greg, and hi, Yousef. I don't have a story to share, but I have a question about the University of Michigan. How does it generate? Does it have its own power plant, or does it buy energy from DTE? And have they been approached about this Ann Arbor this public power plan? That's my question.
Thank you, John. I can give a little bit here and then pass it over to Yousef if you have anything to add. So U of M, like with most things, is a bit of a special case. They actually have their own franchise agreement with DTE, so they would have the choice of who they could go with if Ann Arbor municipalized. Obviously, we would hope that they would go with us, and they would be highly incentivized to do so, because we believe that we'd be able to offer them more reliability, lower rates, and allow them to reach their climate goals. They do have some of their own generation. However, similar to how people with solar panels have to do, it has to be tied in with the DTE grid. And so they end up selling their power back to DTE and then, buying it back. And they've got some more complex deals, but that's the general gist of it. Yousef, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, just to say that I've had several very productive conversations with several regents about this issue, and there is interest, I think, in removing themselves from the DTE grid. As another point of reference, Michigan State University has its own utility. They have their own power plant. They run their campus entirely on their own utility. And Greg's absolutely right. There is that. There's a plant downtown Ann Arbor near the power center that generates steam. That's actually one of the main uses of power on campus is steam and hot water generation. And so there's a plant downtown that does that. But they purchase the majority of their power from DTE through that franchise agreement that Greg was talking about. But like I said, there's a lot of interest. The other thing I know with U of M is that they have a pretty strong sustainability plan in terms of where they want to go. And that's something I didn't really even touch on what I was saying earlier. But, DTE and consumers have a statewide 15% renewable energy portfolio standard. That's all they're required to do, 15%. Absolutely ridiculous. We're never going to solve the issue of climate change or even get close to it with that type of a small number. But that's what the state legislature put in place as their benchmark. And there's no increase in the future. There's no increase in state law to that 15%. We can do a lot better than that, in our municipal utility, and I think help the University of Michigan to meet its sustainability goals in a way that DTE just can't do. They won't do. They're not planning on doing it. They're still burning coal. And so, they're not going to be helping the University of Michigan to meet those goals. We can do that, and we can be more nimble. And frankly, we can adjust our portfolio as with them as one of the largest clients to make sure that happens. If I could, Greg, I want to say one more piece about economic development because it ties into this. I have spoken to an organization that represents some of the largest employers in the state of Michigan, private employers. And it was noted to me that the economic development attraction to municipal utilities is real because the rates are significantly lower and the reliability is significantly better. And so that's why you see in Lansing several new automobile factories that are coming online. I remember this, was a couple years ago, but I visited in Marshall, Michigan, which has their own municipal utility. I visited a massive marijuana grow facility, and they told me straight up, we located here in Marshall because we use a lot of energy, and Marshall has the most reliable and cheapest power in the area. And so it's because of their municipal utility that they invested there. So again, there's this massive, for the University of Michigan or other large employers that are seeking to locate in our area, this is an attraction. This is an economic development feature that we can have in Washtenaw County.
Awesome. Thank you, Yousef. Next up, I have Tom Siepel. Tom, you can unmute.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yeah.
Awesome. So my name is Tom Seipel. I recently moved to Ann Arbor from Chicago in March of last year. My wife and I are both remote workers. And so for us, having access to the internet and access to power is the way that we get to work every day. I know that that's also a privilege. During this time, we both had to conduct work from our phones. Again, kind of a privilege that we can get to do that. But we spent about 4 days trying to conduct business only through our devices. We had to find creative ways to charge those devices so that we could stay on the grid. We have access to an external generator. During that time, it went down. So I had to take time off from work to also go out and repair that because no one was available. All the techs were accounted for on other projects. We were also concerned about the rates that we were going to have to pay on our gas for running that. It's attached to our natural gas line. And so we turned it off, turned it on, turned it off, turned it on when we thought it was only absolutely necessary to keep our house warm. So playing games with whether or not we could run that system for a long period of time was also very frustrating. Obviously, not nearly as terrible as, say, someone whose life is at risk or someone who's elderly or whatever. But for us, it was a real loss of productive time. Very frustrating. Fortunately, we had flexible employers who were willing to accommodate us. But I know more and more people are also moving to Ann Arbor with the proliferation of remote work. It's a desirable place to live. Employers are letting people move where they want to. If we continue to have problems with access to power and telecom, it will become harder for us to justify moving to places like this to work remotely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your story, and so sorry to hear about your hardship. Next up, we have.
Can I respond to
Yes, please
that
do.
caller? Yeah. So that's a huge piece of this, and a story that I've actually heard several times in the last week of people that that are moving to Michigan or that have lived here that are saying basically, like, we can't live like this. We can't live like this, and we're looking at other places to move because of this ridiculousness that you don't have in any other state, really. There's a few energy providers across the country that are equally terrible, but DTE is pretty much bottom of the barrel. You can't get much worse than DTE, and there's several studies that corroborate that. And so, it is. And as we talk about, I mean, it's a statewide priority. I mean, the governor is always talking about attracting more people to Michigan, right? Michigan's one of the few states in the country that does not have a very high growth rate in terms of our population. We're pretty much stagnant, right? At about 10 million residents, and we have been for some time. So if this is a priority for folks that we, expand our population, well, it's certainly not going to help if we can't keep the power on here. So that is a very important item that I am appreciative that you brought forward. I do want to quickly say, because before anybody, people start jumping off, I don't know, Greg, if you talked about like ways that people could connect with A2P2, and I think it's important to say that before folks, leave the call. But I just want to say really quickly, one of the easiest things that you can do right now, if you want to help support this effort, is get a yard sign to put it up in your yard to show your support. That's a big deal. And we're seeing more and more of those yard signs pop up that just says, "This house supports Ann Arbor for Public Power." Become part of the movement in that way. And I think this gives us something to fight for, that is tangible and that can actually make a difference in everybody's lives. So put signs out, donate a few dollars to A2P2 to make what they do happen. They're going to be up against some major money. DTE is using our ratepayer money to fight this, and they're going to need all the resources that they can get. And so, donating money to A2P2, and there's plenty of other ways to get involved, hosting house parties, all kinds of different stuff. I know Greg's going to talk about it at the end too, but I wanted to make sure to say that before we lose anybody else.
Thank you, Yousef. Appreciate that call out. And yeah, I'll underscore everything that he said. The best way to get involved is to visit our website, AnnArborPublicPower.org. If you want to volunteer with us, we always need more hands. There is a volunteer button. You can fill that out. An organizer will reach out to you. As you've just said, donating goes a very long way. And if you do want to get one of our yard signs, you can either come to our events. Our next event is going to be March 18th at Journey of Faith at 3 p.m. We'll be having a meet and greet. We're going to have some fantastic speakers and a great time. You can get a yard sign there, or you can email us and one of us will run a yard sign over to you. You can email us at AnnArborPublicPower@gmail.com. So thank you for that call out. I definitely will say it again before we end here, but Tim has been waiting very patiently. So Tim, you can go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that, Greg and Commissioner Rabhi. The topic I want to bring up is DTE's tree trimming service. I know we had them come out several times in the past to trim them, and they just seem to trim a few twigs. We have some tree branches that are overhanging the power lines that connects to our house. We paid thousands of dollars of our own money because they didn't do a good enough job with that. And we were one of the lucky ones in our neighborhood that didn't lose power. So that's another, it seems like it's a cost saving mechanism for DTE to just skimp on the tree trimming. And that's probably resulted in a lot of people losing power this time around. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that you're absolutely right. In fact, we don't even have to speculate about it. DTE has said it themselves. In a stockholder call that they did on February 23rd, the day after the outage, they actually bragged to their shareholders about how they saved $97 million by deferred tree trimming and how they plan to keep their budget lean by deferring maintenance. So it is absolutely unacceptable. And it's another example of how DTE underinvests in order to make a profit at all of our expense. Do you have anything to add to that, Yousef?
Nope, that's what I was going to say too.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Jessica, you can now unmute. Let me know if you have any issues. Sweet.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was also one of the lucky ones who didn't lose power during the storm. I did have a scary moment last week when my lights and my laptop actually started flickering on and off, but that was it, thankfully. But I've lived here in Ann Arbor for a long time. I think I moved here with my family when I was 2. So I know this is not the first time that this has happened, and it's probably not going to be the last, because I remember a storm back in 2008 where my home was affected, and I think we eventually had to move to someone else's home to stay for a bit because I think everything went down to 47 degrees inside that house. And I just want to say that it's frustrating after watching that presentation, knowing that Lansing was able to get back online within 24 hours or so, and frustrated to know that we still have people here in Ann Arbor who are going on a week without power. And meanwhile, DTE has been raising rates every year, and it's getting more and more expensive for me to keep my house at a colder and colder temperature, even in the winter. I used to keep my house at around maybe 68 to 69. Now it's about 64, and I'm paying much more than I used to just to do that. I don't think that's fair. If DTE is going to do that, the least they can do is make sure that we have a reliable grid and that people aren't gonna have to risk being out for days when a storm hits. I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm just angry about it.
Absolutely. That's exactly what this is here for. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. And I'm glad that you just shared all of that, because that exactly illustrates, what we're looking at here and why we need a municipal utility.
Absolutely. Next up is Jamie Hodges. Jamie, you can unmute. Jamie, if you are speaking, you are still muted. You should have an unmute button, hopefully in the lower left-hand side of the screen.
And while Jamie is unmuting, maybe I'll just say, I don't believe that Lansing actually really lost power. I was in Lansing during the storm, and the power didn't go out, and it was bad. There was ice everywhere on the branches, and I believe at the most about 100 people lost power throughout the service area. But in Chelsea and Wyandotte that did go down, they had power restored within 24 hours, both municipal utilities. So just wanted to say that, because either the power didn't go out or the restoration time was much quicker. And we see that pretty much across the board with municipal utilities. And the data proves that out too. The Citizen Utility Board puts out data every year about reliability statistics statewide for every utility, including municipal, co-op, and investor owned. And the data is clear that municipal utilities are the most reliable.
Absolutely. Jamie, if you're still having some trouble unmuting, we're going to move on, but feel free to raise your hand later if you manage to resolve the technical issue. Thank you so much. Maria Thomas. Maria, you can now unmute.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Yousef, for hosting this today. I'm actually in Detroit, and 2 points I want to bring up. One is a question, and the other is just a comment. Regarding the young man's statement previously about tree trimming and what DTE has or has not done. 2 years ago, DTE tried to pilot a program in certain parts of Detroit where I live, where they were going to charge us $10 a month for preventative tree trimming. Of course, we pushed back against that. And of course, that money, those charges are now included in the rate increases that DTE is asking for. So my question is, because DTE has so much sway with legislatures in the state and actually federally as well, how do we remove dark money out of this equation? Because without the dark money, there would be significant changes and they would be rapid. My second question is, being in Detroit and knowing that Detroit has a municipal infrastructure, but sold most of its access to that to DTE coming out of the bankruptcy, what would it take for cities like Detroit to be able to implement or re-implement that municipality again? Because the last time I spoke with or conversed with the sustainability director for the city of Detroit, they informed me that Detroit government was not interested in re-implementing the municipality structure of energy in the city. So those are my two questions. How do we get municipal power back in Detroit? And how do we remove dark money from this equation? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Yousef, do you want to take first crack at that?
Sure. So both great questions, and I'm glad that you brought the dark money back up, because that again is central to being able to change the political landscape, to be able to hold the utilities accountable. As I was alluding to earlier, and I'm going to explain this a little bit more, but there's two kinds of money. You may already know about some of this, but just for the sake of everyone on the call, there's what's called hard money, which is the political action committees of both DTE and consumers. That is all reported. It's public information. Each of the donors is listed. Usually it's CEOs or executive committee members of DTE and consumers that donate to these PACs. And combined, it's about $1 million a year that these PACs then donate to candidate committees and candidate affiliated political action committees. All of those transactions are publicly available, and any member of the public can look that up on the Secretary of State's website. So that's kind of like the hard money side. Those are the dollars that can be used in an election to say vote for or against this candidate. That's different from the dark money that you're talking about, which, as I said, is probably the most egregious piece here. In terms of, because we're going from talking about $1 million to talking about tens of millions of dollars that they use to influence these elections. And so how do we get that money out of politics? So one of the ways so it's a little bit complicated, because C4 is for 501c4, which is an IRS designation, meaning that it's a federal government. The federal government makes the definitions of what a 501c4 organization is. And so it's a little bit more complicated for us at the state level to be able to actually go in and say what donations can and can't be made. The caveat to that is that since DTE and consumers are regulated utilities, there isn't much that technically the state can't tell them that, can't regulate them on. And so that's why I introduced the bill that I did. The bill that I introduced basically said that DTE and consumers, any investor on utilities in Michigan, could not contribute to a nonprofit entity that is affiliated with any elected official, any currently elected or appointed official, any staff member of a currently elected or appointed official, any past appointed official, or any candidate running for office, or any staff member of any candidate or past official, any family members of any of those elected officials, because that's how they do it. They don't set it up for themselves. They have their wife set it up or something else like that. And so there's this that we can do, pass a bill like that, which would definitely change the dynamics around the dark money that's spent there. But the Michigan Public Service Commission can also put a freeze on what the utilities can actually spend in elections. And in fact, after the 2018 election, where there was probably the most egregious amount of money that was spent to influence elections, there were several primaries that the utilities influenced and were successful in defeating candidates that had opposed them. And they spent, I believe, $18 million in that year of our ratepayer money. And the Michigan Public Service Commission put a rule in place that said you can't do that anymore. But unfortunately, it was just for a year. And so after that year was over, they started doing it again, and they're doing it now. And so we need laws in place like the one that I introduced that would stop the flow of dark money to these C4 organizations. So we need to get that bill reintroduced. I'm not in the legislature anymore. I served in the legislature for 6 years. And now I'm a county commissioner because I was term limited from my service in Lansing. Really quickly on the Detroit piece, you're correct. And I do want to put the caveat in that during bankruptcy and the emergency management of the city of Detroit, these were not decisions that the people or their representatives necessarily made. These were decisions that state appointed officials made or creditor appointed officials made on behalf of the residents. That the emergency manager system is a racist system. It is a system that has systematically gone after public assets in Black communities across Michigan. They did it in Benton Harbor, they did it in Detroit, they did it in Flint, and they took what the public spent your tax dollars over generations to build, and they dismantled it systematically. It is completely racist. It is unacceptable what they did. And to your point, how do we undo it? And the reality is, at this point, it's about generating the political will to basically reinvigorate these same efforts. What we're doing in Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County can absolutely be done in the city of Detroit. In fact, I talked to several people last year when we were fighting against the 8.8% rate increase that DTE was going after. I went down to that meeting at Wayne Community College District, where we spoke against that rate increase. And I talked to several Detroiters that at the time were saying they wanted to push for starting a municipal utility in Detroit. So you're not the only one. Many of your fellow Detroiters are interested in this as well. And it's about building the political will, just like we are here in Ann Arbor, and maybe even collaborating on something that we can do in Southeast Michigan. Like I said, there's elected officials coming to me from other parts of Wayne County that have said they're interested in this. We're trying to build a regional movement here. And I think there's definitely room and opportunities for us to collaborate on what's going on in Detroit and to help build out, that political effort there too. But I just wanted to clarify because it's important to distinguish between the people did not give away their assets. It was the assets were taken, were stolen from the people of the city of Detroit. And that's a very important distinction.
Thank you, Yousef. Fantastic answers there. And the only thing I'll add is that I absolutely believe that the city of Detroit should be able to reclaim its public power utility. I won't pretend to be aware of all of the legal hurdles that it has. However, I do know that Detroit is actually one of the few communities in Michigan, actually the only community in Michigan outside of a few areas in the UP that are not under the Foot Act. And that actually opens up a lot of opportunities within Detroit. So absolutely would be happy from Ann Arbor Public Power side to work with groups in Detroit that are interested in pursuing this type of project. All right, next up, we have Liz Hatfield. Liz, you can unmute.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. I'm Liz Hatfield. I've lived in Ann Arbor for a really long time. I was a student here. I now work at the U, and I used to live near center of town, near campus, and I had no power outage issues, so I wasn't really aware this was an issue. I relocated 2 years ago, kind of like southeast, still within Ann Arbor city limits, 2 years ago, and I've lost power, I don't know, 5 or 6 times since moving, 3 within the past 8 months, all multiple days. So certainly impactful. Secondarily to this, that's kind of personal. Professionally, I run one of our clinics and I'm one of our residency program directors. And with this most recent power outage, we have staff and providers that are parents as well. And their A, B, C, D, E, F options for childcare were impacted for power outages. And so because of this, they weren't able to attend, right, because they had to stay home with their kids and make sure that they were safe. And so unfortunately, we had to kind of reschedule and change patient care services, which is frustrating and kind of impacts that aspect as well. And so, again, the U does a really great job, especially the hospital and patient care services not having power outages, but it impacts the providers and the staff that have to provide that care. And so that was an additional frustration with this most recent outage. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Liz. All right, the next person we have up is Lisa Jevons. Lisa, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, yeah, I have 2 questions that you can probably answer pretty quickly just about the public power utility itself. The first question is, if and when Ann Arbor achieves the public power by buying DTE's infrastructure, who would be maintaining and repairing our newly purchased infrastructure? Would the city be responsible for hiring and training a staff of workers to do this like DTE does now? And the second question is, who pays for the legal battle to come that we predict will take place to determine the cost of the assets that the city would be purchasing?
Thanks, Lisa. Those are excellent questions. I'll take a first stab at it, and then Yousef, if you have anything to add. First off, in terms of hiring and training staff, the city would maintain its own staff. It wouldn't necessarily be directly under the city, at least the way that Ann Arbor for Public Power is imagining the utility, and how we've had it advised to us by various experts, is that the utility would operate as a separate entity with its own board. We are looking to have that be an elected board, and it would be administered by a skilled administrator of the utility. And likely we would be looking into putting preferential hire towards any DTE employees who are displaced through such an effort. So certainly we would be getting skilled people to work within our utility. However, yes, there would be city staff. The city would also likely hire contractors where appropriate. And additionally, one thing that is really cool about public power utilities across the country is that when there are bad storms like we just faced, public power utilities actually share workers with each other that allow them to respond to outages quickly and have the staffing necessary to do so through agreements with the Michigan Public Power Association and the American Public Power Association. So that's really cool. The second question that you had about the legal fight. Yes, so that would be a cost that would have to be bared by the city. However, there are creative strategies that other cities have taken throughout these fights in order to compensate for that cost. We actually just had a really excellent roundtable with legal counsel during the Boulder municipalization fight, who actually explained how the city of Boulder actually put a tax on the infrastructure for the utility itself and forced the utility to pay for the legal costs of the municipalization fight itself. So there are strategies that we can undertake to try to alleviate that burden. But, you know, there is truth to the fact that we're going to have to be in for a fight. You know, we're going to have to put up some money in order to make this happen. But in the long run, it should have significant benefits for us. Yousef, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I guess I would just add, you know, on the worker side of this equation, I think that's a great question. And Greg's absolutely right. You know, in terms of the structure, I mean, in Ann Arbor, we have a water utility, you know, that provides services, and the city has staff that, you know, maintain the water, you know, pipes and the treatment plant and all that. But as Greg is saying, the governance structure would be a little bit different. Imagining something more like AATA or the RIDE that has their own board. It's appointed by city council, but it's sort of its own entity, but operating a utility instead. And so one of the things I just quickly wanted to say was, you know, another advantage of municipalization, in addition to what Greg was saying about the mutual aid, is that having local staff that are, you know, from your community or live near your community, is that, you know, when they're out doing a job or fixing part of the grid, they're driving around, they're looking at the grid itself, they're looking at different infrastructure pieces, and they can see proactively, you know, when pieces or trees need to be trimmed, if there's a branch hanging, they'll see those kinds of things proactively instead of being dispatched in an emergency. They're out and about in the community. In addition, you have that coordination between departments where you'll have a fire truck out or a police car on patrol or a public works truck or a city water utility, you know, vac truck out, and they see, hey, something isn't right about that line. They can call the utility department in and they can, you know, take care of it. There's that coordination that occurs there. Whereas now, you know, I don't think that there's as much of that because it's DTE's the maintainer of the grid, not the city. But if it's an asset that is part of that portfolio, then city workers are, you know, being more proactive about coordinating those projects. The other thing I want to say on that is I'm on the executive board of the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, which meets on a monthly basis. Our last meeting, we got a presentation on infrastructure from one of the state offices on infrastructure. And there was a local city official that asked the question, because, you know, one of the big things that we're looking at is, hey, every time we rip up the roads, we should be combining that with, you know, all these other infrastructure projects. So we're not ripping up the road and then going in and ripping up the road again, or making, you know, holes in the road. We should do it all at once. And so this individual mentioned, well, when every time we rip up our road, we contact DTE and we say, hey, do you want to bury some power lines? You know, here's an opportunity to do that. And they've gotten nothing but crickets from DTE. Well, if we controlled our own power system, we could incorporate that into the projects that we're doing as a city pretty much automatically. It's like, okay, we're going to rip this road up. Let's put, you know, a power line in as well. And so you can have more of that coordination to facilitate, because most of the cost of burying power lines is the digging and the excavation and the removal of what's above it. And then, you know, but if that's already being done, here's an opportunity to do that. So you increase reliability by having those local eyes on the ground, by having that coordination, and by having the ability to bundle projects with other municipal projects that you're already doing. And you see that. And by the way, you're able to do some creative things too. City of Holland is one of the only communities that has heated sidewalks in their downtown, and they're able to do that from their generation facility with excess heat that's generated. They have pipes under their sidewalks and they don't have to salt, they don't have to shovel, it just melts the snow right away. You're able to do those creative things when you're not, completely driven by profit. Last thing I'll say is on the workers, that are potentially going to be displaced. Making sure that we hire those. Obviously, they're going to be some of the most qualified people out there to work, and I absolutely think that what Greg said is true. But keep in mind that DTE is planning on a lean year, and Greg said this. Greg's not making this up. Okay, there are slideshows from their earnings call where they presented to their investors that they were in a lean period, and that they're going to be in a lean period for the foreseeable future. And they listed out what that means. And what it means to them is less contractors. What it means to them is less line workers, which means they're actively going to be either not hiring or firing their own employees so that they can save money. Because apparently $1.1 billion is not enough of a profit, and an increase of almost $200 million over last year is not enough of an increase for these folks. I mean, maybe instead of one lobster dinner, they want 2 lobster dinners a day and caviar on the side. I think that's probably what they're going for here. And the line workers and the people actually doing the work are the ones that are going to suffer as a result.
Fantastic. Very well said, Yousef. Thank you so much. And thank you, Liz, for the fantastic questions. Just a call out, you do not necessarily need to ask a question. If you have a question, feel free, but also we're very interested in just hearing the stories that you all have. So please, if you'd like to speak, feel free to raise your hand. Next up, we have Lauren Sargent. Lauren, you can unmute.
Yes, I believe that you said earlier that in the step towards creating a municipal utility, that the city council could actually eliminate step 1 and there wouldn't need to be 2 ballot drives, but 1. Could you both say a little bit more about that and how we might impact that process? Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, so basically the next step after the feasibility study, in order to move forward with municipalization, is to begin the acquisition process. There's also strategic reasons why you might want to create the utility at that point as well. That is something that legally can be done by city ordinance. It does not need to go to a vote of the people. Ann Arbor for Public Power is ready to go to the vote of the people if we need to. We're dedicated to this campaign. We believe it has popular support and we are ready to fight it out. However, we are absolutely hoping that we can work with the city council to move this forward quicker. And we absolutely would move forward a lot quicker if the city council got on board. So I would highly recommend that all of you contact your city council representatives and express your support for municipalization and urge them to continue moving forward on this. And we do have a petition. I believe Rachel Pooley has been posting it in the chat. You can also find it on our website. It's the top little green button that says sign the petition, urging the city council to take action on municipalization. So that helps a lot. Anything to add there, Yousef?
Nope, nothing to add. Although I did see that Jamie posted in the chat. I know Jamie was unable to unmute.
Oh yeah, I'll go ahead and read Jamie's statement and then we can respond to that. Thank you so much, Lauren, for that question. Jamie said, DTE does not allow any calls to discuss problems. I was forced to call a heating and cooling company to drain my boiler radiator heat. Spent over $300 and no way to recap that cost. I had to run my water at sink and was once quoted at $750 for my water bill. Unacceptable service, as DTE will not even take my calls. Lastly, what is Dana Nessel's role in helping cities and counties move forward? She is positive in her support to help citizens without power. You want to take that on first, Yousef?
Sure, yeah. So as I was saying earlier, the expenses that people are incurring here, it's not $35. There's massive expenses. And the things that you're outlining are absolutely, everybody has a story. It's hotel rooms. It's fixing your furnace or other, equipment in your house that's now not working because of these frequent power outages. It's replacing your groceries. It's replacing your medicine. It's life-threatening. And so there needs to be a way to compensate people for the outages that we incur. And, you know, in the additional benefit of the bills that I introduced, which has that hourly rate, hourly credit that increases, is that it is an incentive for the utilities to actually fix their damn power grid and not have it go out in the first place. And if it does go out, it's a scramble to get everybody back their power, because every hour, everybody's credit is going up. It's automatic, and it's increasing by the hour. So there's an incentive for the utilities to actually fix it. Right now, there's no incentive. There's no incentive for them to fix the grid. There's no incentive for them to repair everything. And there's no incentive for them to have any type of good customer service, because we don't have a choice. We are stuck. We are captive ratepayers. We're captive ratepayers. We don't have the opportunity to go to another provider and get energy from them. We have to get our energy from DTE. Unless we municipalize. That is literally the only way that we can get around this, other than there is a small 10% choice market, but that 10% choice market is met. We're at the 10% choice market, and those of us that are not in the choice market, basically we are in the DTE by default, and we cannot get out of it other than municipalizing. It is the way that we are going to do this. And so why is customer service so bad? Because they don't care. They don't have to care. They don't have to worry about us going to another power company and taking our business elsewhere. We can't do that. And so, you know, here it is. This is our opportunity to municipalize and take that power back, because I can tell you, this is the difference. It's accountability for municipal utilities. I often tell people the story proactively, because there was a big outage in Lansing as well about 10 years ago. It was exactly 10 years ago, actually, this year. And it took the power grid down, because but after that happened, the people of Lansing, they definitely called their city council members. They definitely called their mayor. They definitely showed up to city council meetings, to Lansing Board of Water and Light meetings, and raised hell. They came down with their torches and pitchforks, and Lansing Board of Water and Light reacted by making a massive investment and a sustained investment in their grid, in tree trimming and burying power lines. And they have not had a substantial power outage since then, in an entire decade. And so that's the difference, right? It's when we call as DT customers to our customer service, it's a busy signal, it's nobody picks up, it's a canned response or a robot answering. When you have a municipal utility, it's you call the utility number. If for some reason they don't pick up, you can call your council member, you can call the members of the Board of Water and Light, you can call the mayor, you can call other departments of the city. And there is accountability. And you as voters have accountability, because if they're not fixing the grid, you can vote them out. You can vote them out. We can't vote the CEOs of DT and consumers out. We can't do that. We don't have that power. And so this is about taking our power back in that way too. In terms of Attorney General Nessel, you know, I think that there is a role to play. I have seen that she is looking into a lot of these issues around price gouging, around hotels, you know, abusing people, around some of the losses that people have had. And I absolutely support what she's doing in that regard. She's been a pretty consistent voice for the people and not, you know, submitting to the will of these corporate interests. So I've been really impressed with her so far, and hope that she continues in that work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Yousef. And I'll just, since we're on the topic of customer service, and we don't have any hands at the moment, which I would encourage you to raise your hand. We can go through some questions that people have submitted in the Q&A if we don't. But my own little personal story. So I'm currently still out of power, going on 8 days. I'm suspecting that it's going to be 9, because I don't think they're going to get out tonight. A branch fell on the line to my house. And I heard it sounded like an explosion. My whole house shook. Blew several fuses, but it didn't completely cut power to my house. I ran downstairs to check the breaker and heard hissing coming from my water main. Assuming that I had a leak, I pushed things out of the way. I opened up the cabinet, and when I opened the cabinet, I saw sparking electricity, arcing. My electricity was grounded to my water main, and all of my power was now going through ground because my neutral line had been damaged. I flipped my breakers and immediately started trying to contact DTE. I first went to their website, which was down. I went to their call center, which was down. And I called the Overburden Fire Department, who, you know, credit them. They came as quick as they could, though it was about 4 hours later because of how many issues there were. And I was terrified. I had no way of really knowing whether it was going to start a fire, what was happening with my power. And when the fire department finally showed up, they asked me if I had contacted DTE, and I told them that I couldn't get a hold of them, and they told me that they couldn't get a hold of DTE either. That's unacceptable during a huge crisis like this for them to be completely unreachable. And for, I'm not the only one that is still out of power more than 8 days or 8 days now later. That needs to be addressed.
Quick shout out to Councilman Mike McDermott, who just posted in the chat. He is one of the regional elected officials that has reached out to me, and I'm glad that he posted. He's very interested in putting a regional collaborative together, and posted his contact information in the chat. So thanks for being here, Councilman McDermott, and for your work on this. Very passionate elected official who's trying to make a difference, not just for his community, but for our whole region. And so I'm grateful that he's on the call and willing to put forth that he's working on this effort. And we definitely want to collaborate. And I plan to be part of the efforts that he's helping to organize to get our region together. So definitely contact him if you're interested in that. So thanks for being here.
Awesome. Absolutely. We have one question within the Q&A that I think would be good for us to answer. I'm anticipating us going until 9 p.m. Is that acceptable to you, Yousef?
Yeah, I might have to jump off a little bit earlier, but let's keep going as long as there's questions for sure.
Absolutely. So we have a question from Mike Nowak. I might have mispronounced that, but how would we generate enough baseload power on our own? And the basic answer to this is that we wouldn't. Certainly we can generate as much power as we possibly can within the city. However, we would need to rely on power purchase agreements. And that in order to do that, we would need a connection to the larger distribution grid. Luckily, with the process of municipalization, we would purchase those, and we would be able to enter into power purchase agreements with power generation facilities outside of Ann Arbor. Anything to add to that, Yousef?
Yeah, just adding that we can't do that right now, right? Because we don't have a municipal utility. The city of Ann Arbor can't just go out on the grid and buy power from somewhere else as a city. We aren't able to do that. It's not possible. It's called community choice aggregation, and it's not legally allowed currently in Michigan. And there's basically no chance of changing the law to allow it. The DTE and consumers will fight that with everything in their arsenal. And so our way to connect to MISO is by getting a municipal utility. It's really the only way that we can do that. We would be potentially over time setting up more and more power generation, especially as needs change. And especially if we want to, transition to renewable energy, we're going to have to do some of that. And so that's part of why we would have capacity to encourage people to put solar on their roofs and use city infrastructure to put solar up or other alternative energy generating sources. We already have, as Greg said, a hydroelectric dam in the city of Ann Arbor. We could use that power. Currently, that power is being sold to DTE at a much lower rate. We're basically getting the short end of that deal from DTE, and we're still selling them our power. We could keep that power here in Ann Arbor and use it for its true value, and actually, would help us to provide the power needs to residents in Ann Arbor. So we would have to bring some generation online, but whatever we couldn't bring online, we would have the opportunity to buy on the market and the grid.
Absolutely. Thanks, Yousef. Okay. Looking through, it looks like we've got a couple more hands. I'm going to go to Lisa Carey Harrow first. Lisa, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment. I just wanted to share with everybody that our public schools were closed for 2 to 3 days here in Ann Arbor. Kids had to stay home. They didn't have any way to be online or conduct their learning. So there was a lot of kids that were missing out on school. They were missing out on food during those days. Our kids, they need all the supports they can get right now in our community. And a company like DTE, who claims to want to partner with our schools, who wants to advertise to our children, who wants to give our children faucet aerators, power cords, make them conduct surveys for gift cards at the age of 10 and 11. What did they do for our kids during this power outage? They did absolutely nothing. There are some schools in Ypsilanti that have been closed 6 days. These DTE people come to our back to school barbecues and they pretend to play with our kids as if they care. But when our kids are home and they need food and they need to be learning, they offered nothing to our kids and our families. And I would like people to think about that. And again, encourage you to reach out to your public officials and advocate for municipal utility, because our schools could definitely benefit from that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Looks like we have Zachariah Farah wanting to talk. Zachariah, you can unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I am an Ann Arbor resident, and you know, I've done some volunteering with Ann Arbor for Public Power for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. And I'm currently working as a research assistant at the Rogel Cancer Center. And, you know, we get a lot of public money there to research cancer, which is supposed to improve people's lives. But we have been affected actually by DTE outages, despite the fact that the U of M hospital, I think parts of it regularly take a lot of energy from the central campus power plant, I believe. But when there's a DTE outage, sometimes only when the wind is blowing, pretty crazy, the lights will flicker and it will reset a lot of the machines, very expensive equipment inside of the Rogel Cancer Center. And so what that means in my job is sometimes we're running a very, very expensive experiments. An individual experiment can, for sequencing, for example, can cost over $2,000. That's $2,000, over $2,000 of public money that we all paid for. And it gets instantly reset. The experiment is canceled. And we just lose that money. So I'm astounded by the fact that, you know, I don't think there's ever really been an accounting of stuff like that, for example. That's an enormous loss to the public. And I feel like I want to show up and feel like I'm contributing to something good and improving people's lives. I actually happen to research the same kind of cancer that my grandpa had. And instead of being able to research cancer some of the time, I have to deal with these outages, and we just lose at times one of a kind, completely unique samples from patients. And it kind of breaks my heart to think that because of the negligence of DTE, we are not only experiencing all these damages that we've been able to see directly, but it's also setting back research and hurting people in that regard. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that we are losing a lot of public money in terms of the research, not only wet lab research experiments, but just hours where people can't do online research, for example. It's enormously expensive.
Absolutely. Thank you for that story, Zachariah. We do have one question that David Girk just posted in the chat here. Is there anything the state legislature can do to facilitate local municipalization of power systems? Yousef, do you have any ideas on that?
I mean, I think just the laws right now are good. Actually, municipalization is mentioned in our state constitution. And so cities and villages in particular, have a lot of power currently when it comes to being able to form their own municipal utilities. And so the folks that wrote our state constitution in the 1960s, were very protective around municipalization, which has been very good for our process in terms of the discussions that we've had with A2P2. And it's actually something that is a tradition, frankly, in the state of Michigan, and something that's been protected for over a century in state law, because most of our municipal utilities are that old, within that last century. I think the last municipal utility was several decades ago, but set up several decades ago. But it is protected because it's something that has continued, and that the state legislature and those state legislatures that have come before have seen the value in municipal utilities. And municipal utilities don't just happen in large communities, they happen in very small communities too. We see that across the state, medium-sized communities as well. And so in terms of state law, though, that I would love to see state law that clarifies that not just cities and villages, but also townships and counties and charter counties or regions can set up utilities as well. Now, I believe that the state law does allow that based on my reading interpretation of statute. I do believe that counties have the ability already to do it, but having an explicitly stated law that is as strong and protective as the laws for cities and villages, I think would be very helpful. But like I said, I think that most cities and villages for sure, counties, based on my reading, and charter counties for sure, are all able to do municipal power now. But expanding that out to other types of municipally organized units would be definitely beneficial.
Absolutely. And I would just also add, Yousef mentioned it earlier, but if the state legislature remove the ability for DTE and consumers to contribute to these dark money packs, that would certainly help as well, because that's probably the biggest hurdle is the opposition from the utilities. But of course, one of the reasons why we're looking at doing this on a local level is because it's very difficult to get the state to move on this. But never know what you can do until you try. Okay, Lauren, looks like Lauren Sargent has another question. And then I think that will probably close us out for the night. So Lauren, you can go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, you mentioned the dark money, and something that people should be aware of is that our dark money doesn't just stay in Michigan, but DTE actually contributed to killing net metering in California. And they're scrambling to install solar and get their money for it before net metering goes dark in California. So they're harming the development of solar and renewable energy, not just here, but all across the country. And also, I've been supporting public power for some time, but Zachariah mentioning his grandfather reminded me that part of it for me is that DTE killed my grandmother. She was 93 years old, living at Presbyterian Village in Detroit. This was a woman who was still running for the bus. And unfortunately, during a DTE power outage in the summer, they continued to hold their Jerry Fitness class, which she attended regularly. And unfortunately, she was very healthy, but elderly people are very medically frail. The balance is very narrow. And she became overheated, was rushed to Sinai Hospital, lapsed into a coma, and died because of not having air conditioning and having participated in an exercise class. So that's something else for any of you who have elderly relatives to think about. When the power goes out in August and it's hot and humid, that can be just as dangerous as these power outages in the winter. And it's something that we often don't think about. But keep an eye on your friends and loved ones, because this is literally life-threatening. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
If I could just say,
please.
a couple things. So I absolutely want to uplift to what Zachariah and Lauren just said. This is a life-threatening situation. It's not just an inconvenience. They even when you go and contact DTE or email them, they always say, "So sorry for the inconvenience." It's not an inconvenience. This is a life-threatening situation for our residents. And the other piece of this that I want to make sure to mention is it is a life-threatening piece that impacts different populations differently. As a previous caller was saying, if you are lucky enough to have a generator, which doesn't always work, but if you're lucky enough to even have a generator, you can keep the power on. A lot of people can't afford a generator. I don't have a generator. My power is out for 4 days. And so, but it impacts different populations differently, and different people have different privileges than other people do. DTE, and I want to be very clear about this, DTE is a racist company. DTE is a racist company. And the reason for that is multifold. First, it's that disproportionate impact. But the second piece of it, I was standing on the steps of, again, Wayne Community College District before that MPSC meeting at a press conference of the Defend Black Voters Coalition, talking about how DTE and consumers used their dark money to fund the accounts, not just of any legislators, but fund the accounts of legislators that were directly introducing bills to suppress voting. The Jim Crow 2.0 that you've heard about, that Republicans introduced when they were in control in Lansing, DTE and consumers actively funded the accounts of legislators that introduced those bills. And so the Defend Black Voters Coalition was out fighting against that and highlighting the fact that they were doing that kind of thing. But there's another part of it that I think is actually probably the most egregious piece, that it is completely heartless, and it goes beyond just these outage, some of the outages that we're talking about. It goes beyond the grid reliability piece, and it goes into the realm of making sure that everybody has, because an outage doesn't just occur when there's a storm, right? For a lot of our residents, outages occur when you can't pay the bills. When you have to choose between going to the grocery store, feeding your family, and paying your DTE bill. That is a choice that many families have to make. And some people who can't pay their bills, they get shut off. Okay. And DTE is the only utility provider in the entire Midwest that took the unpaid accounts of its customers and sold those unpaid accounts to a debt collection agency. In the state of Michigan, a debt collection agency can garnish wages up to 25%. And so individuals and families that were already struggling to make ends meet, who could not pay their electric bills, are now losing 25% of their income to these debt collection agencies because DTE has no heart and they are flat out racist. The people that they're going after are the hardest hit communities in our state. And what they have done is completely unacceptable. There is an incredible ProPublica article that came out about this that highlighted the things that they've been doing. And again, this is unique to DTE. It's unacceptable. And when we have our own municipal utility, we can have programs that support our neighbors that can't afford their bills. We can have programs that uplift people so that we as a community can make sure that we're looking out for each other instead of just throwing people out in the cold, shutting off their lights, and then sending them to a debt collection agency.
Thank you, Yousef. It's an incredibly important fight. Taking on DTE is a David versus a Goliath battle. They're incredibly powerful, they're incredibly influential, and they're going to use every bit of their money and influence that they can to shut down this fight. And they have more money than we'll ever have. What we need is people. We need your support. We need your help. I hope that you'll visit our website, that you will get involved in the campaign, you volunteer. We have a bunch of fantastic organizers that will reach out to you to help you get plugged into the campaign in any way that you're able. Additionally, donations are very appreciated. You can donate right on our website. You can sign up to become a monthly recurring donation. That really helps us a lot. It really helps us plan for what we are able to take on and how we can expand this fight. You can share our information with your friends and families. You can follow us on social media, A2 Public Power on Twitter, A2 Public Power on Instagram, A2 Public Power on Facebook, and A2 Public Power just as of today on TikTok. All of these go a long way to helping us take on this fight and to create a greener, more sustainable, and more reliable power system for all of us. So I really appreciate everybody that's come out to share your stories, to learn about what we can do to fight for a better tomorrow. And I'm really excited to continue this fight with all of you. So thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your night.